Okay, everybody, it is time for another episode of the Nostalgia Trap podcast. I am your host, David Parsons, and I am pleased to bring you another great conversation today with someone who is a mover and a shaker in the left world. I know he would cringe if I said that, but I'm all about cringe. Maximillian Alvarez. I hope you know his work. He is a columnist for The Baffler. He has a column called The Poverty of Theory on The Baffler, which you should check out. His stuff is awesome. But I know him from, like how I've met a lot of guests on this show is by being on social media and seeing his commentary and seeing kind of his everyday analysis of the things that are going on, in particular stuff that's going on in college campuses. All that Antifa stuff, fighting against the white supremacists and other right-wing nasties that are descending upon college campuses and are really kind of, to me, like picking up on the really nasty stereotyping and hatred that has been aimed at higher education and public education by conservatives for decades now. We're like really reaping some of that ugliness, and we're reaping it in an attitude that is pervasive, that college campuses are filled with spoiled Marxist kids who are being indoctrinated by spoiled Marxist professors, and that we don't really need any of that. And, that just plays that attitude, which has been, again, pushed by conservatives for years and years, is now something that I think has trickled into the mainstream where, people believe this stuff and people have a really, really distorted view of what goes on college campuses. So that's part of what Max likes to talk about and part of what we talk about in this conversation. But we also just get into, the nostalgia trap stuff. Max and I think, share a lot of common history. We're both from Southern California. We both kind of grew up with a kind of certain conservatism, dumbass conservatism, I think he calls it, surrounding us and really infecting our minds a little bit. And it took us both of us a while to kind of figure out that we were actually radical left people. And that was a process that happened through, education, reading. And for Max, it came out of Russian literature. So he tells me all about that and kind of where we're going. And in particular, I love his take on kind of realizing that academia and particularly labor in academia is structured in the same way as labor everywhere else, and that means it's being attacked and exploited. And that part of it, that revelation of kind of seeing that, God, this stuff you can't really escape capitalism in the academy, and in fact, the academy is where you're going to feel capitalism really powerfully. I think Max is really perceptive about that and really, really articulate about kind of what the main issues are. So this is a really fun conversation for me. I hope you enjoy it. You can find other such conversations at nostalgiatrap.com. That's where you can do everything with the show. There's all sorts of free episodes on there, bonus episodes. If you care to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/nostalgiatrap and subscribe to the show. You'll get access to the bonus episodes where we talk about the stuff that I don't really want to put out to the whole world. If you want to hear, the more kind of darker, juicier angles on what me and some of these folks think, then subscribe to the show and you can get access to our bonus episodes. So that might be fun if you're intrigued by our conversations and you want more, or you just want to support the show. Patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. And thank you to all the people who are subscribing to the show. I couldn't really do this show without people supporting it. And that means, I don't have advertising. Obviously, it'd be weird to be an anti-capitalist show with a bunch of advertising right now. So, it's Bernie Sanders style. Little donations. Support me. Support the show if you like the show. Thank you so much for those that are doing that. Okay, so let's get to this conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Before we start, actually, let me just mention again that Max writes for The Baffler. Really, really good stuff on The Baffler. Check out his column. Check out everyone else's stuff. And the Nostalgia Trap is on thebaffler.com now. So that's really exciting stuff, and you can check out a lot of episodes there. Okay, let's get to it. This is me talking with writer, academic, all-around awesome dude, Maximillian Alvarez. Thanks for sitting down with me. I don't know where you are. Where are you right now?
I am stuck in the humid hellhole of Ann Arbor, Michigan right now.
Ann Arbor, Michigan. I've heard Ann Arbor, Michigan come up on this show many, many times. I've never heard it described quite as a human hellhole before.
Oh, the humid hellhole.
Oh, humid hellhole. That's funny.
Yeah.
like Jesus, man. It must be really bad there.
Yeah, sorry about that. I mean, like, I'm a SoCal guy, so like I will never get tired of complaining about humidity.
Yeah, of course.
And so, I mean, it's green and lush and beautiful, and all the undergrads are gone, so I should be happy, but that's just not my style.
Well, you're from Southern California originally?
Yeah, I grew up and spent my entire young life until I was 18 living right at the kind of northeastern edge of LA County and Orange County in this little town called Brea.
Brea, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I mean, my family is pretty much kind of from all over Southern California. I mean, like my folks are now in Garden Grove. We were living in Anaheim before I was born. My mom grew up in Compton. My dad, in South Central. After he came over from Mexico. So we got family all over the place in Southern California.
How much? I mean, it comes up on this show a lot, like the history of Southern California, obviously, because that's where I was, and that's my memories. Mm-hmm. And my, I guess you could say like politicization came through a lot of things that I witnessed at a very young age around me in Southern California, especially like, I don't know, the LA riots were a big touchstone. Were you? How old were you? Were you aware of the LA riots when they happened?
Yeah, in the sense, like, I would say in the same sense that I was aware of, like, the OJ trial, that it was, like, something kind of, like, air conditioning, my world and through television and conversation and stuff like that. I would definitely say that Southern California history has, shaped my my family's story for sure. And I would say as a brief aside, it's kind of funny that listening to your show, which I'm a big fan of, part of the attention to your own Southern California roots has like allowed me to indulge in my own nostalgia trap listening to it.
Yep.
Because a lot of it definitely resonates. But yeah, I mean, I would say, even going back a few decades, my family history was really kind of shaped by the tumult of Southern California and all the kind of racial class politics that shaped the landscape over there. I mean, like I said, my dad, when he and his siblings immigrated to the United States, he and his brother were living in South Central, and it was actually after the Watts riots that they decided to move to Buena Park. And my mom, growing up in Compton, kind of had a similar story. But yeah, I mean, I think more than anything, it wasn't any particular event in Southern California history, but just that. Like I said, the constant air conditioning of a very particular kind of culture and worldview that permeates so much of Southern California and the entire landscape there.
Well, I always like to ask about family too. I mean, how political, quote unquote, was your family? Were these discussions that were had in your house? Because I've mentioned before, they weren't in my house. I had to like seek them out, and I think that probably shaped a lot of why my politics ended up the way they are. But what was your family like? Were they talking about this stuff? Was it on the surface?
Yeah, and yes and no. Because it's doubtless that my family's politics, shaped my own in a really significant way. And I guess just from the outset, I would say, because I'm trying to get ahead of the eventual blackmail that's probably coming. Because and I think in a similar way to you, if I recall correctly, I was raised in a pretty, conservative Catholic household.
Yep.
And so it was more that like my political worldview was shaped by just the everyday kind of culture and conversation around that. And the rest was kind of like drips of reinforcing discourse coming from, Fox News on TV after it came around the mid-90s.
Yep.
And my dad, when he would drive us, when we would go to work with him and stuff like that, he often had like Rush Limbaugh, Dennis Prager on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
My mom, she liked listening to guys like Larry Elder, who's I don't know if anyone outside of Southern California.
Yeah, I know Larry Elder. Well, I'm in Southern California, so I don't count.
You're missing the point.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good. And I guess one of the ones that actually sticks out in my mind, having driven around a lot with my mom, I guess this is maybe kind of a more significant anthropological point, if I think long and hard about it. But the fact that like half of your life in Southern California is stuck in the goddamn car, so like the power of talk radio there is probably more outsized than it is in other parts of the country.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah,
and Rush Limbaugh was everywhere when I was growing up too, and like even you're right, I didn't think about that, but like I was jumping in and out of like lots of parents' cars. And it was other parents. There's one dad in particular I remember that just always had Rush Limbaugh on and was always like reinforcing the points to us and everything. And I guess at the time I didn't think too much of it. I just thought that's what people listen to. But now I'm thinking like, God, this kind of like propaganda distribution center is like the carpool, and like the kids in the cars are picking this stuff up too.
Right, yeah, the media of social reproduction,
mm-hmm.
and one of the ones I was going to say that actually sticks out in my mind the most is probably Dr. Laura, Dr. Laura Schlesinger.
Yep.
She was on all the time, and it's weird. I can scarcely remember a lot of the stuff that I would hear like from Dr. Laura in my mom's car to Rush in my dad's car, but like, yeah, I'm almost kind of unnerved when I think of like the kind of nostalgic cadence that like their voices have.
Right.
Me. Like,
yeah. That's
like Rush's like sweaty hot dog voice still like, takes me back to a pleasant time, and I don't know how to deal with that.
Totally. Yeah. Well, he's an expert broadcaster, and like he has that radio voice. And it's kind of cartoonish to listen to him now. But he gave birth to like the filth that we see today that became like, I don't know, mainstream. Like the stuff that Rush Limbaugh used to be like wasn't he like a fringe figure a little bit? And like now Fox News like basically has that point of view as like a mainstream thing.
Well, yeah, and this is something that I was talking to my folks about quite recently, actually, because I remember from Rush to Dr. Laura, and I would just say that like with Dr. Laura, it was more not necessarily overt kind of ideology coming through the speakers, but it was a lot of reinforcement of kind of like a traditional family values, conservative, nuclear family worldview that I think that those kinds of things had a much bigger impact on me and how our family operated.
Right. Yep. Yep.
But when I was talking to my folks, even they who have had Fox News on, for as long as I can remember almost, even they are kind of getting to that point that I think a lot of, center right people are, that, they used to love Fox for its kind of like, quote unquote commitment to like the ideological diversity, to providing a different way of interpreting, the political landscape through a certain kind of worldview. Mm-hmm. Whereas like now, like it's just pure propaganda,
So they bought the kind of idea that Fox was putting out there for years and years, which is like the fair and balanced, like we're here to kind of be the other side, and kind of balance out a media that's like totally, biased towards a liberal point of view. But now they're like disgusted.
I'd say that's about right.
They're seeing through it. I say that because I think my parents are coming to the same thing, where they're kind of like, especially this I mean, since Trump got elected, and since the separation of children at the border thing, which I want to get to, like that part of it, and watching like Sean Hannity become a kind of like really insane, like sputtering propaganda machine. My dad for the first time has gotten really like much more critical of Fox News as like, this is just pure propaganda. Like, and it's like, you and I have probably seen it always as such, but like, it seems like the target audience is starting to kind of come around to that idea too.
I think so. And, I think there are many more complex reasons for that underneath the surface. And it's, this is kind of the realm in which, you know, I try to work academically, you know, and thinking about media and subjectivity and all that good stuff. But
yeah, maybe you can explain that, because you have this thing that you're working on, like you call it the literature of politics, right? And can you explain what you mean by that? Because I think it's such a compelling idea, and it kind of goes along with what you're saying right now, right?
Yeah. So let's see. I mean, I'll take a little detour, I guess, to try to explain how this idea kind of took hold of me by kind of telling my own like academic development.
The nostalgia trap part of it.
The nostalgia trap. Let's
So for just to catch everyone up on where we're headed here, Max writes about I mentioned the literature of politics, but you've got a take on politics and contemporary politics that uses kind of the tools of comparative literature. So let's go back and see how you got into all of that. Did you know that you were headed to graduate school when you were young? Was that something that was like in the cards for you always, or were you like me, where you kind of like surprised yourself by getting into graduate school?
So I definitely didn't envision where I am now. That's for sure. I mean, like growing up, there was no doubt in my mind that I wanted to be an MD. And so I was just like dead set for, you know, my entire childhood and young adulthood on being a doctor. But at the same time, I was always a very, you know, literary guy. You know, my mom has saved like all the like poems that I've written from like elementary school to high school.
Oh, I love that.
And, well, it's funny too, because I tell people that I was like, yeah, you know, everyone knew that I wrote poetry in high school, and like, you know, they didn't beat me up for it, you know, so, you know, I think I was pretty fortunate in that respect.
Yep.
But it was never, you know, kind of a life path, you know, it was always like, you know, something that I enjoyed doing on the side. But when I went to the University of Chicago, as an undergrad, you know, I was doing the standard pre-med stuff, going through all the weed out courses and whatnot. And eventually I was weeded out. Like, you know, I think that honestly what kept me on the pre-med track for 2 years was just pure stubbornness. But like with each new course, you know, all I could think about were like the literary electives that I was taking. It was actually in my second year that, you know, just wanting to be part of the, you know, the nerdy culture of UChicago that it constantly, plays up for its audience. I went home for winter break, and I just decided to read the biggest book on my bookshelf, which was The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's a big one. And so I just started reading it.
I thought you were going to say Infinite Jest, but that comes later.
Yeah. My love affair with David comes later, for sure. But Fyodor was my first literary love, I think. And so I was just at UChicago in a coffee shop, like in early January, reading this big ass book, and then someone asked me if I was taking the class on it, and I didn't know, you know, that there was even a class, you know, on this one specific book. So ended up taking that, talking to the professor, who was just this really like kind of great old school Slavic professor. I mean, he was like 5'2", His head was kind of like permanently cocked to the left. Had like a droopy eye. His name was Professor Ingham, and he was probably, the biggest influence on me, putting me on this kind of literary path. But, he warned me up front that like I would be out of my, element. I'd be with like upper level undergrads who were studying literature and Russian literature. And I just ended up, really loving the discussion, really kind of finding my feet there. All the while just like, inverse relationship with my enthusiasm for organic chemistry.
Right.
And so eventually by the end of the year, I broke. And I remember walking out of a study session for OChem, the OChem final, and calling my parents and just being like, hey, are you guys going to disown me if I switch from, pre-med bio to Slavic languages and literature? And to their credit, they took it really well. I mean, I think it was a shift, for sure. But it wasn't something that was so, unexpected for them, because they always knew I was a very artistic and literary kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really kind of the big, fork in the road, I think, to use a cliche.
Yeah.
Then
we all come to that, though. I mean, I mean, I was pre-law, and it took me a while to like figure out I hate this and I don't want to do this, and I'd rather. I mean, I switched to film studies, which you talk about like parents being disappointed. I was like, I'm not gonna be a like civil rights attorney. I'm gonna be I want to be a filmmaker like Quentin Tarantino. And that, yeah. But you gotta follow your passion, and that ultimately led me. I mean, were politics at all a part of this decision? Where were you on your political kind of development at this point?
So, I mean, literature is definitely the force that I would credit with my long and gradual political evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I got to U Chicago, I was a conservative douchebag, and all my friends from U Chicago can attest to this. I used to even have like a shirt that said, I'm a Republican, not a Republicant.
Wow.
Yeah.
God, we are really alike in how obnoxious we were in early college. I literally had a license plate frame that said something along the lines of like, vote liberal, it's easier than working. Which is like so insane. I think it was like literally like I picked that up from like Rush Limbaugh or something. I mean, it's a brief phase in my life, but it's embarrassing even to bring up right now. But it fuels the political evolution, right? It kind of like was a necessary step for guys like us, I guess.
Yeah, I think so, and I definitely want to put an asterisk next to that so that I comment on it later, because I actually think that having that experience, or talking to people, who are experiencing that themselves, is actually one of the keys to understanding kind of the political warfare that we're currently involved in.
Totally. I mean, you posted something just the other day that was like, and I like the confidence of it because I feel the same way, where you're kind of saying like, there's all this kind of, we get the idea that there's like this widespread revulsion with the families being separated at the border. And we're seeing it in the press, and we're seeing even people like Laura Bush weeping about it, even like Melania Trump weeping about it. But you pointed out something that I think is really important, which is that there are a ton of Americans who are really happy about this, who like this is their fantasy. They actually want more. And you have a kind of confidence in stating that, like, just believe me, there's a whole kind of movement out there of people who are smiling about this. And I think that in part comes from your kind of like contact with the right at an early age, right?
I think so. I mean, like, and it's so goddamn appropriate, if I could use such a ghoulish term.
Yeah.
that like the supposed architect of this, new policy is a ghoul himself, Stephen Miller, who is a guy, like, I know this guy.
Totally.
Not actually, but I know so many of him.
Yep.
Because I think he was, he went to school, high school in like Huntington Beach or something like that.
Yeah.
And I hung out with people like this. I get the kind of, like, when I look at videos of him from his like high school, I think like one of the most telling parts about him isn't like just his, what he's saying, but the little fucking smirk at the corner of his lips when he's saying it.
Yes, totally.
For this kind of mindset, the kind of mindset in which the most ghastly aspects of our political reality have been able to fester, right? There is almost an equally, if not more powerful impulse for people, a political drive towards gleaning satisfaction from trolling and pissing off the people around you.
Yeah, that's what that whole thing about, like, oh, I love the drinking the liberal tears and that whole meme.
Right.
Is like the idea of like their pleasure comes from like upsetting people and trolling people. And you're right. I mean, that Stephen Miller is someone I totally recognize. He seems like a Southern California Nazi to me. And I know that term gets thrown around a lot these days, but come on, this guy is a little fucking Nazi, and I've seen him and his kind all my life, and definitely here in high schools in Southern California. That guy, you're right. The smirk is a really vital part of it. Because they get pleasure in kind of bucking the quote-unquote status quo, but that includes, like you're saying, embracing the most ghastly like versions of insane American racism in order to like get lulz or something. It's insane.
Yeah.
And it's insane that this guy's like in like literally in charge of policy now. I had that thought the other night. I kind of like the thought crossed my mind that little guy that I hated in school, even though I kind of knew those guys, and have grown to just really resent that he's in charge of this policy and he's making this happen is just really too much to handle in a lot of ways.
Right, and I mean, like, that politics of resentment, right? It's not necessarily a new concept, right? I mean, we talk in history about like these kind of endless cycles of progress and backlash and this kind of deep set political fabric that is materialized more than anything in the relationships that people have like around them. But I think that something that goes to the media aspect is that we are currently now living in like a fresh age in which these kinds of relationships and the kind of emotions and capital that we get from interacting with people, right, is kind of like the fare of our everyday life. And it's upfront and personal. Where I guarantee that there are people that I went to high school with who are seeing my angry, impassioned, bleeding heart posts and everyone else's, and they're getting satisfaction from it. And
oh God.
I mean, like, it's a sad thing to realize, and I think it's all the more a point to not just rely on those kinds of things and call it politics, but to recognize that I mean, like, this kind of resentment and this kind of political capital gained from the negative affect, like and emotions of others. And Trump kind of providing this sort of avatar for people who still, and this is important because these people, the people that we know, they still feel victimized. Even though Trump won, even though the Republicans are in charge of every branch of government, even though the cultural landscape is clearly, shifting in dangerous directions. Again, the power of that upfront, immediate, kind of mediated landscape, sends a message to them that, like, they can't openly celebrate this kind of thing because people will be mean to them on social media.
Right.
And that means that they are, in fact, the victim.
Sure. Well, Jordan Peterson and people like that are still playing that game where they're like, we're not really allowed to say what we want to say. Like, and I always want to be like, what is it? What is it that you want to say? You know, like just say it. If it's so dangerous and you're such a rebel, then say it. And you know what I always suspect, and I don't know if you would agree, but I always suspect that what they're really saying that they quote unquote can't say is just always like really racist shit, really homophobic shit, really misogynist shit. Like that's what they really want to say, and they feel restricted, and that to them is their freedom being restricted because they're not allowed to say nasty shit about people.
I think that's right, and I think you know it goes even deeper because this is like one of the things that I revile most about someone like Jordan Peterson, and I mean we could talk for days about him because I actually think that.
Please let's do a couple minutes.
Right, let's do a bite size.
Yeah, throw him in the trash and move on.
But I would say placing him in what we're already talking about, right? This kind of web of you know, social media, new media, and the kind of new capital that comes from social interactions, and those interactions being made visible for everybody else, and blah 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 blah.
Yep.
You know, I honestly feel that Jordan Peterson and others like him, right, have we'll stick with Jordan Peterson right now. Jordan Peterson has like a very, you know, basic kind of self-help message that, as many others have pointed out, is kind of wrapped around, you know, like a kind of vicious core of, you know, like a mystical hierarchical worldview. But honestly, the thing that has skyrocketed him to you know, infamy and that has allowed him to profit off that is the fact that I think that he is making you know, he is trying to convince, you know, millions of other people to kind of shape their worldview around his experience of people being mean to him on Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, you know, Nathan Robinson had a really great article about this in Current Affairs where he said, you know, Jordan Peterson, Barry Weiss, all these other, you know, kind of anti-PC pundits, they're pretty fucking loud for being so supposedly oppressed, right? I mean, like, they got like columns in the New York Times, best-selling books. They're on TV shows all the time. I was like, you know, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but that's not what I consider, you know, being oppressed.
They also,
you know, having message silence.
Right, and they also decry like the culture of victimization all the time. They're like, people make themselves to be victims, but that's literally their bread and butter. Like their entire like public persona is about portraying themselves as the victims of, like, you know, the liberal media or whatever. And there's such, I don't know, there's like a lack of either a lack of self-awareness there or like an intense awareness of what they're doing. But either way, it's like, yeah, they want to have it both ways. The Barry Weiss, Jordan Peterson, those figures are, I don't know. I think you mentioned this too on another post of yours, because it's like, it's so frustrating that people like that have such loud public voices, and it's indicative of like a media that's like really trying to, I don't know, like promote these figures. I mean, the New York Times has done piece after piece with these people.
All right. I mean, like, and it's the banality of the you know, historical evil of, you know, trying to kind of make everybody happy, and to, you know, like, utilize it in ways that you can profit from, that, you know, that makes the people running the New York Times, the university administrators, everybody else thinking that, you know, like, that this is just about opening the sphere of discourse, and thus they become like way blind to the larger shift towards the right that they are in fact, you know, like, inducing.
Right.
But yeah, just to kind of cap this off, you know, this is something that, you know, at U of M, when we were organizing protests of Charles Murray, you know, contrary to what the Vice News coverage showed, you know, we didn't no platform him. We just protested him to make sure that our community knew, you know, like, the dangers of, you know, accepting his quote unquote scholarship as just like, you know, like one form of academic work among many. But without a political moment, in which this anti-PC narrative has so much capital. These people don't exist. I mean, like, or their careers don't exist. And so that's why, like, there will be no kind of Jordan Peterson message that isn't propped up by a feeling of victimization. Yeah. Even though he's got millions of people watching him on YouTube, and again, he's trying to kind of make his reading public and his viewing public, hate this culture that is more or less. It's not to say that it doesn't exist, but he is emphasizing it way beyond its actuality. And effectively using his platform to try to inoculate himself from people who are mean at Twitter by presenting them as, like, a representative of the culture writ large, absent the fact that he is selling millions of books and making shit tons of money.
And to get back to what we were talking about with school, I mean, the thing that really bothers me about figures like that is that they're like, they describe the real fascists to them are like this very, very old school anti-communist idea of, like, Marxist professors indoctrinating campus kids and, like, taking college students and turning them into brain dead Marxist robots, which it always makes me wonder if people like this have ever been on a college campus. They're like, it's not been my experience. I've been teaching college, I mean, in private and public universities for like 14 years, and this vision is just not anything close to reality in any way, including the idea that, like, the colleges are filled with Marxist professors, or that the school is that students are all, like, super sensitive, politically correct snowflakes. That's just not been my experience either. And so, that to me is a really kind of personal resentment, because it contributes to this, like, I think an idea that's stuck in the American imagination, which is that college is worthless, and particularly, like, studying the humanities is worthless, and we need to go back. I mean, I don't know if you heard Jerry Brown, our governor here in California, like, just a couple weeks ago. I mean, this is the supposed liberal, was like,
is this the Chipotle comment?
Yeah, talking about Chipotle and how, like, they are a good model for university system, and how we should, like, people really should, like, not study whatever they want. They should just, get a few classes that'll get them a certificate for a job and get out. And it's just like, this is the liberal talking about education. So, like, that stuff has stuck, and it really bothers me. I'm only saying that because I wanted to, like, hear more about your college experience and hear more about kind of, like, how did you go from switching from medical school to comp lit and studying, Slavic languages and stuff like that. How did that end you up in graduate school? How did you decide to continue that?
Yeah, so I'll keep telling that story, but I absolutely want to get back to the higher ed stuff, because I think that actually, I've been writing for the Baffler for about 2 years now, but also write for the Chronicle of Higher Ed and Times Higher Ed and all those places, and I think that, like, try to write about, like, a number of things, but the thing that I end up fixating most of my energy on, and I think the thing that I'm cited more for, is my commentary on the neoliberalization of higher ed and the effects that it has had on politics. So yeah, I definitely want to make sure that we get back to that.
Yeah, we'll get back to the Chipotle stuff then. For sure.
Chipotle on the
because there is a wider context to that. It's not just about Jordan Peterson, obviously, but
right.
Yeah. So go ahead. Yeah. Take us back in time, Max. Where do you decide to become not a doctor of medicine, but a doctor of philosophy? I guess we would call it. How did you?
And this is actually, like, something that I think I've been trying to work on for purely selfish reasons, because I'm preparing to go on the job market, and I have to try to explain this weird tangle of experience and interdisciplinarity that has led to that has led me from going from, like, pre-med to bio to Slavic literatures to comp lit to being, like, a Mexicanist, and also a media theorist, and a historian. Right? So yeah, there's a line there, but I really need to kind of make it apparent.
You sound like L. Ron Hubbard when you introduce yourself. You're like, I'm a philosopher, a nuclear physicist, yeah, historian, novelist. You're like, good Lord, man. All right, we get it. You do a lot.
God, I think I don't know whether to be horrified or.
It's good. It's good. Are you kidding me? I have to explain film studies and podcasting all the time, so it's like it's the good thing about being interdisciplinary. I think there's something really appealing about that, and I think that the people that are like too up their own ass in their one kind of thing they do that's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. My brother and I both, my second oldest brother and I both went to the University of Chicago. He was 2 years ahead of me, and he did econ. So he, I remember walking around with him and him like bumping me and being like, "Oh, there's a Nobel Prize winner," "Oh, there's some guy masturbating to Milton Friedman," all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But our paths certainly diverged after graduation. He went into kind of the finance world, consulting world, and then I went to get a master's in Russian literature in England, of all places. I'd studied abroad in England in the University of Bristol for my third year as an undergrad. Made a lot of friends, in the department and outside, and ended up going back after graduation to kind of do a master's there in Russian literature. So then, this was when I finished. This was about the time where things were getting real in terms of the kind of ripple effects of the recession back home. Southern California in general was hurting, but my folks, both of their careers are intimately tied to the real estate market. My dad is a realtor working in South Central. My mom is an interior designer. And so, it was just nothing, for years. And so I moved back, home after finishing my master's to kind of try to help out while I was figuring my own stuff out. And I would say that this kind of period in general was also the radicalization period, the kind of coming to consciousness period. Because, the class roots, the working class roots of our family were always very present in our upbringing, right? My mom's side of the family, my gramps, he's one of 13 kids from Charlotte, North Carolina, born right after the at the tail end of the Depression. They were dirt poor. He hitchhiked to California 2 times before he was 17. And so we have that kind of those kinds of stories of just being, poor and carpetbagging your way across the country.
Totally.
Along with my dad's side of the family, the immigrant side, being brought over by my great grandmother, finding foster families, kind of growing up as, essentially a live-in slave, for a lot of his youth. So those kinds of stories were very much present in, and shaped how we were raised and how we understood education and kind of what we wanted our futures to be. It's almost it's both a beautiful and an infinitely sad and sinister thing that I think both sides of the family, repeatedly stress the importance of a good education.
Yeah.
And there's a class element to that.
Sure.
Right? Because both my grandpa, my mom, my dad, and extended family, the things that they said was that, an education is the one thing they can never take away from you. And it's kind of, I believe in that, you know, like, and it's one of the reasons that I've, you know, decided to go down this route and why I love teaching so much. At the same time, I recognize that I am part of a system that has adjusted itself to, in a vampiric way, you know, suck all that's good out of that sentiment and turn it into debt and for us and profit for others.
Yeah, right.
But anyway,
which is you're right, a massive tragedy, and I think that putting it that way is really, to me, it captures the essence of that tragedy. Because I mean, I taught at City University of New York, CUNY, which is a working class school. All the kids were like you in the sense of, and like me in some sense too, where came from families that didn't go to college and had never gone before, and were, you know, it was an essential element of their class identity was kind of like, that this value they had in education. So yeah, to see that turned into debt for those people, and the people that are going to get fucked over the most by debt are the people that are already at the bottom of the class system. Seeing that dream turn into a nightmare is just another ingredient in radicalization for me, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So becoming aware of that, you know, our parents' deep set belief that like a good education is the path out of the working class, has, you know, like been rerouted to, you know, to become like the path into, everlasting peonage, basically.
Sure. Yeah.
So in around 2010, 2011, right, I was back home, you know, I was trying to find a job, trying to help out. I mean, like, you know, things were looking really dire for our family and, you know, the house we had grown up in. And after like 4 months of just like searching, you know, and with 2 degrees, albeit in Russian fucking literature, you know, I couldn't find a single job, and I applied every day. And so the best that I could do was to start showing up at these, you know, blue collar temp agencies and strip malls at like 3 a.m, waiting around with mostly other, you know, Latino men, and just kind of smoking cigarettes, drinking like 7-Eleven coffee. And I was like reading like Bleak House by Dickens to try to like not be depressed about everything.
Right. And what kind of jobs are you looking for? Like just like temp office work and things like that?
No, these were like, you know, warehouse and factory jobs.
So it's like labor, like, we call it, I mean, there's a company called Labor Ready in my neighborhood. I think it's a pretty big one. It's very similar, and people line up for jobs like that. They used to try to, yeah, that's how they pack all the warehouses here in my town too.
And
this is another example of neoliberalism at work.
Right. The temp,
yep.
You know, like economy and the flexibilization of labor, you know, I was, you know, in that firsthand. And, you know, like, some of the jobs were just kind of, you know, mindless. You pick up that box, you put it over there kind of stuff. But you know, there were a lot of shitty ones too. I mean, sure. I think the lowest point for me, while I was like, looking at grad school applications and debating whether or not I wanted to do it, you know, at the same time I was working at this one factory in, I think it was Anaheim, that you know, their whole thing is to clean the soiled laundry from hospitals in the surrounding area. And so, you know, we showed up from the temp agency. They wouldn't tell us what we were doing. They put us in like full hazmat gear, smocks, goggles, gloves, and all that stuff. And then, you know, they just dumped these humongous bags of blood, shit, piss covered, you know, smocks and blankets. And we would sift through those, and we'd find like syringes, and guys were running off the line and throwing up and never coming back. So I was doing like that kind of work, you know, for months and months and months, while I was debating, you know, like whether or not I wanted to go to grad school. And so I think that, you know, a year later, when I eventually did decide to, you know, make a tough go of it, and try, because the first time I applied to some places that you know, that weren't really right for me, and I was trying to get into the same place as like my girlfriend at the time, so it didn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
the offers that I had just like weren't the right ones.
And are you applying to PhD programs in what, comp lit at this point?
At this point, yes, I'm looking at PhDs in comp lit. I was even looking in English. And yeah, then the following year, you know, I kind of adjusted my project to look at like kind of the intersections of Russian, U.S., and Mexican kind of literature in the 20th century. And you know, got a bunch of bites, and I think it was when I got to grad school, you know, obviously I was very excited. I was happy not to be, you know, back in the warehouses, although there was, you know, certainly a kind of there's a different kind of camaraderie that comes with working in places like that.
Totally. And the fact that, and I think that the fact that you've worked in places like that, and I have too, has, you know, kind of been a deep part of informing our politics. And
yeah.
I don't know. I don't act like I was like this huge like steel worker or something, but you know, I've had contact with the working class, and my contact with the working class was a big part of I don't know, shaping who I am and how I see things.
Right. And so and the I guess the two things that I would say is that yeah, I mean, like, you know, my dad was very old school, that like, you know, basically the day after our 16th birthday, he like would punch us to wake us up. Like, not like hard, but like in the arms, to be like, all right, go get a job.
Right.
And so, you know, we worked, you know, all the time, you know, worked through little jobs in college, you know, like worked during high school, all these little menial shitty jobs. And I would say but still, you know, like my family had, you know, for a certain like time, like, from, you know, like the end of the Reagan era to, you know, 2008, you know, we had kind of reached our way to the middle class, and then, you know, like so many others, it was sucked down the drain.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think that that definitely impacts the ways that I think, the ways that, you know, I talk to my family, and the ways that I approach my students and stuff like that. Because I think, you know, one of the greatest sadnesses of my life, I think, is realizing that I probably won't ever be able to convince my dad and my mom that, you know, the 2008 recession wasn't their fault.
Wow.
And that, you know, there's a great line in, you mentioned David Foster Wallace earlier, you know, his like commencement speech that some people love and some people hate.
Yep.
You know, he says, that he characterizes the sentiment as like this constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing. And I feel that there's a lot of people like, you know, my family, who are in that sort of situation.
Yeah.
And you know, like are just dying for any sort of way to get back. And I think that honestly, that was one of the biggest reasons that well, not the biggest, but I mean, it was a big reason for people like my family to, you know, consider Trump's message.
Yep, totally.
Yeah,
I always tell people to watch the trailer that the Trump campaign released on the Friday before the election in November 2016. They released a 2-minute like YouTube trailer. It doesn't talk about build the wall at all. Instead, it's like a 100% economic message, and it's hitting exactly the feeling that your family felt, which is like, what happened? We had it and we lost it. What happened? And he basically gives that message, and I don't know if that was him or who calculated that within his campaign, but you know, watching it, I got a chill, because I was like, this is a message that's going to be very powerful. And that's why the economic precarity thing is so dangerous, because people can go either way when they reach that, you know?
Yeah, very much so. And, you know, this is one of like the constant gripes that I have with my, you know, liberal and left-leaning colleagues, and both in the kind of writing world, but especially in academia. You know, there are a lot of times where in conversation, you know, I'll be talking to other grad students or even other faculty sometimes who say things to the effect of like, oh man, I just can't understand how anyone would vote for Trump. And you know, sometimes I just snap and I say, then what the hell good are you? Right? Then why are you here?
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is the kind of stuff that you're supposed to be trying to figure out.
Well, someone said the other day, dude, just along those lines, I don't want to get us off track, but like someone said the other day on Facebook, and I was like, it was a similar sentiment, but they were saying, I don't understand how any like cop can enforce these ICE laws and how they can do this to children. I don't understand how they find people to do that job. And I'm like, Are you kidding me? I mean, all of American history, there's always been people who are willing to put on the uniform and abuse people. You're right. I feel the same way. If you can't explain that and you don't want to explain that, then what good are you? You know, we need people who need to intimately understand why people put on that uniform and why they're ICE agents and why they're police. We need to get that, because if we don't, we're not gonna confront this.
Right, we're not. We're gonna keep fucking losing.
Yeah, I mean, totally.
My dad is a Mexican immigrant who voted for Trump, and I think he's always voted Republican. But even like after he became a citizen and voted for Reagan in his first election, like the economy was always his biggest kind of driving impulse. Like he remembered very vividly as a realtor, like under Carter, the gas, lines that they would have to wait in.
Totally. Yep.
The like exorbitant interest rates on like, house loans for houses that he had to try to work around, but like no one could really do anything with. So those kinds of things, like had a deep, have a deep abiding impact in the ways that people like my mom and my dad vote. So that's one thing. And the other thing, I guess, that has impacted the ways that I, think about the university itself and academic labor and what, intellectual work is or should be, right? Like really came to a head when, like, during my first few years of grad school, I started hearing like very clear and distinct echoes of the same stuff that I would hear on the warehouse floor from the managers. Right? And so like that's when like my ears really started to perk up, because at first I was like, okay, shit, I made it back. I'm back in the ivory tower. Like, I can try to become, this professor with the elbow patches. And at the same time,
Yes.
I was hearing what I remember from the warehouse floor, as one of many temps who were there. I mean, like, we used to work, in one warehouse where I worked for months. We would work from like basically 5 a.m. to 5 or 6 or 7 at night. So, long ass days. And at the end of the day, they would line us up. And the manager would go down the line and point to the people they wanted to come back the next day. Everyone else just, had to go and find something else.
Jesus. What a brutal end to a brutal day. Jesus Christ.
It was.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that sticks out most vividly in my memory. I can hear the like clopping of the manager's like boots on the concrete floor, and the things that they would say, or again, the things that I started to kind of like recognize in what administrators and advisors were telling me, about the labor that we were doing in academia, which was, you're lucky to be here. Don't complain. Mm-hmm. There are hundreds of others waiting outside who want to take your place. Be grateful, blah, blah, blah. And that really kind of stuck with me.
Totally.
And so it's in that vein that I think I've really been trying to kind of think of how the university fits into, this process of neoliberalization.
Totally. And I mean, the word adjunct was something that I didn't really know and think about. And I feel stupid because I went to UC Santa Barbara during the 1990s, and there were like there were strikes of graduate students there, and I remember seeing my TAs go on strike. And kind of scratching my head about what they were. I thought like, well, this is just like other strikes, I guess. And I didn't really kind of put it in a larger context. But then when you become that graduate student, many years later, I became that graduate student and heard this term adjunct, and then started getting sent to CUNY campuses to teach. And realizing like, oh, there's like a whole history and politics to this that's basically the labor politics of the university, and it's ugly. Like it's it's really bad at CUNY, where they're still paying something like $3,500 a semester or something like that for a class. It's like they're one of the lowest in terms of what they pay their adjuncts. But either way, did that become like a subject of inquiry or study for you? Did you get involved in your union, or how did that play out for you as you kind of like realized this awful politics of exploitation in the university?
So yeah, I mean, I would say that University of Michigan has a phenomenal graduate student union, and their presence on campus is very noticeable, and I think we're very fortunate to have them. Shout out to GEO. But for me, I think the getting involved in labor politics and other kinds of organizing in the past couple of years, has more or less grown out of, I think, to come back full circle, like my way of processing kind of like how the operations of the university are like are impacted by this political climate in which messages that I've been like hearing since I was a kid have like reached a fever pitch. Things like this anti-political correctness wave, and how it ties into the ongoing decade-long corporatization of universities, how that translates to the classroom and stuff like that. And this was actually like, what I first started writing about at the Bachelor. I think the first piece was, about the U Chicago letter, a couple of years ago from one of the deans that was like, there are no safe spaces here. So it was addressed to like the incoming class, and it was like, that kind of thing. And so the debate was very much like, focused on like, okay, is this a good thing? Like, or are safe spaces necessary? But like, it felt like no one was really addressing what seemed to be the underlying, kind of material conditions for this, which were that it was like, look, like this is a marketing ploy. It's a very obvious marketing ploy. Like the U Chicago administration is phenomenal at marketing itself, and has always been as kind of like the hard-nosed where fun comes to die, like academic rigor kind of institution, and it has been capitalizing on this anti-PC fervor as a way to like basically manipulate its rankings, because it's always in like the top 3 or 5 universities, and is always trying to kind of one up the Ivy Leagues and stuff like that.
And I think it makes me think, like, is this the kind of stuff that rich parents who are considering sending their kids to these colleges, is this the kind of stuff they're asking on campus tours? Is this the kind of stuff they want to know, about like safe spaces and things like that? And if that's true, that is tragic, because it means that media campaign has worked and made people think that this is like what the university is really like.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. That's what, like people ask about. And it's absolutely, part of the fabric of the university culture.
Yeah.
And I guess, to put a finer point on it, the thing that I was hung up on was how this was related to these structural kind of changes to, higher ed that have happened over the past, 30 or so years.
Right.
And how U Chicago as a private institution, kind of fit into that. But yeah, I mean, I think, having the experience of, working as a factory temp, right in my rearview mirror, it was my thought that, well, it seems to me that the kind of like, people are worried about political correctness, acting as a form of censorship, on campuses. But if people are indeed worried about the censoring of ideas and the closing off of open discussion, then why the hell do any of these pundits not seem to care about the much larger crisis of academic freedom that is embodied in the adjunctification of and the devaluing and stripping of protections of academic labor in general, and all the ways that in fact leads, the people teaching our classes to censor themselves, because in an increasingly corporatized system where students are treated like customers,
Yep.
where teachers are treated like temps, and where, you know, the administrations are treated like PR firms. I mean, like, that's a recipe for disaster when it comes to having like open inquiry about controversial topics.
Of course, yeah. It turns it into basically, and you're right. I think that idea of like turning the students into customers who are kind of like purchasing a service is something that trickles all the way down into student attitudes, and that's something that's really tragic to see, because it's like they become, and understandably so, they become concerned with like their output, you know, and what they get out of this, and that's about it, and they're not really seeing it in that romantic way. And when I say romantic, I mean that in the best way, of like, you know, an actual discourse that moves us forward and creates more whole human beings. That's not the purpose of the university at all anymore. And the students absorb that, and they just basically see it as a transaction that they, you know, we're basically, I mean, it's really like the Uberization of education, because it's like we're responding to students basically fill out like a Yelp thing on us at the end of the semester that is, you know, gives the university some sort of data of how their customer experience was, and then the university makes decisions on whether we're going to be hired for another semester based on those Yelp reviews. It's a really it's a degrading process for everybody. Like, it's just awful. Right. Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And so it's like that cover story of like, well, the university is just a bunch of Marxists and like oversensitive, politically correct brats is really, really enraging, when what's really happening is the university is being destroyed by capitalism.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like when I'm arguing with, you know, well, I try to like have very civil discussions with like TPUSA reps and stuff.
Oh,
I know
God.
I know they're probably filming me and just trying to get me, you know, fired or something. But this is one of the things that always drives me, you know, nuts. That I'm like, you know, like, shit. Like, if you think that, like, you know, we're part of some like Marxist cabal that's just like pulling the strings, you know, like, no one's told me that yet.
Yeah.
I was like, how do I get in on this?
Seriously, how do I get paid to make Marxist propaganda for kids? I would love it.
Yeah, where's my George Soros check? I need to eat.
Right. I mean, we've seen. I mean, it's all politics too, because we've seen, like, I don't know, here in I say here, but like it's at the City University of New York. We've seen professors nearly lose their jobs over like just like supporting BDS or having like a Palestinian come to their class and like tell a story. Like, so it's like it's so disingenuous when they're talking about like freedom of speech, because they really only care about you know, their own ability to say racist shit, and then you know, their own ability to censor people from saying things that are uncomfortable to them or against their politics.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that wholeheartedly, and I think disingenuous is one of the most consequential, you know, like analytical terms that we can have today. Yeah, because like so much, not just about Trump, but, you know, like in issues like these, like trying to work through what is being said and what is being meant, you know, or what is the difference between what is being said and what is being done.
Yep.
Like, honestly, this is one of the biggest points of contention, not just with me and others, you know, who argue this sort of line, and the right, but between me and a lot of other folks on the left.
Yeah.
And
right.
This is something, I've written about a lot, you know, like I've been like, tried to be as civil as possible about it, but I've been, you know, like unfriended or have like other lefties, you know, like get angry at me about this, because there's a certain core contingent of the left that seems to be operating on the disastrous notion that, that this is a genuine atmosphere of concern for like free speech and academic freedom,
right?
Not you know, a power struggle.
Yeah,
and I think that one of the through lines for like everything that I've written in public and even in my dissertation is there are two. There's like one, a basic materialism, right? Where whether it's the university, whether it's, you know, jobs outside the university, political, you know, politics with a capital P.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I try to think of how, you know, just kind of like my old school Marxist way, like how material conditions shape subjectivity and lead politics to be shaped in certain ways and blah 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 blah. And I really focus on media as a driving kind of force for that.
Yep.
The other through line connecting, like, you know, everything that I've written is the argument that when it comes down to it, politics is endless war.
Mm.
And I think,
and it's a and it's a religious war.
Yeah.
Like in the sense that that's come up before. You know, that, you know, liberals tend to think of everything as, you know, we'll just like logic our way out of this. You know,
right? Or that the institutions, the center of the institutions propping up the center will hold.
Right.
It is very religious. And you know, this has been kind of the great, you know, liberal fault, is to trust in this notion of progress so much that they believe that the institutions and practices and norms that shape to society depends on are in fact the very things that are being eroded right now. And this includes university, when you have Charles Murray, TPUSA, Richard Spencer, all these fuckheads who are, you know, trying to eat away at the very edifice of higher education and remake it in their own image. We have not only, you know, like, you know, well-meaning but clueless liberal administrators, but also a lot of pundits, you know, from the center all the way to the left, who keep believing that, you know, we're trying to defend, you know, some sort of timeless principles of open academic inquiry and free speech on campus, because we're taking the right's terms at face value.
Yeah, right.
We believe that you know, it's our job to respond in kind when Richard Spencer, you know, says that, you know, like it's his right, First Amendment right to, you know, speak on public college campuses. At the same time that he's admitting on his own podcast, he's like, yeah, no, we don't believe in free speech. You know, we want to silence, you know, people who aren't, you know, like in our like vision of a white ethno state, you know, but we recognize that this is a tool we can use to, you know, reshape the very institutions that we are trying, you know, to get into right now. And you see it at the legislative level across the country. Right.
And liberals are falling right into this trap. Like they're like, you know, the right is trolling them essentially. And liberals are, by taking it at face value, liberals are falling right into the trap. And it's, you know, I think you and I are both, and a lot of others are waiting for the left to fight back in a way that's more effective than saying like, well, let's all sit down at the table and talk together. Because we're dealing with an enemy who's already, I don't know, I hate to say it, but savvier at playing the media right now.
Oh, absolutely. They're far savvier. And yeah, this is like one of the greatest sources of political agony for me, and I know for many others, is that, you know, like we're over here screaming to others to help us, to basically say like, look, like this, like stop taking it at face value. This is, you know, part of a war of position to, you know, essentially kind of reshape things to the point that we are in fact the ones, you know, who are going to be on the outside looking in.
Yep.
And that just highlights that it's not a unique situation, I guess is what I'm saying, is that like what we are seeing is just, you know, like a heightened materialization of the endless war of politics, in which forces, you know, it's dialectics, bro, right? You know,
totally. Yep.
Forces are always at odds, vying to undo, you know, the other's work and to remake society as they see fit. And if you're not fighting, you're losing. Yeah. And I think that for liberals, but also for a lot of others, you know, if they think progress, quote unquote progress, can't be undone, or that it only has one meaning and only goes in one direction, and they're failing to acknowledge the rules of this game, which, like you said, you know, the alt-right and many on the right know way better. Yeah. And I think this is why you see so many Democrats clutching their pearls as Republicans are, you know, basically like overturning Roe v. Wade through state regulations on term limits. You know, they're crying as Trump rolls back Obama policy after Obama policy, as if like the Dems had called dibs on those things, and somehow that meant those matters were off limits moving forward. And I was like, no, that's not how it works.
Yeah, as if they were settled and they're not political footballs that we're going to fight over for years and years. I mean,
right. And this is like Obama's like the arc of history bends, like in our direction. It's like, not if you don't fight for it.
Yeah, I mean, I was just at a conference at Notre Dame. It was a conference about the GI movement. It was all these grizzled old Vietnam veterans who were in the peace movement, and it was pretty awesome. And there was a guy, like a younger guy, that stood up and was like, I try to make these points on social media, and like I get made fun of, and people unfriend me and block me and stuff like that. And some Vietnam vet dude who was like a veteran of the peace movement, he basically said, if you're gonna be in politics, you got to toughen up. You got to be tougher than that. Like people are gonna hate you. They're gonna call you names. Like it's a fight. And you can't expect that you're going to like make proclamations, particularly radical ones, and that you're not going to get flack from it. You're going to get heat, and that's the name of the game. Is fighting it out. I think liberals aren't ready to fight, and that's like we're seeing how bankrupt they are. When they're really like here we are, and we've got like the makings of child concentration camps being built out of the wreckage of abandoned Walmarts, which has to do with neoliberalism too and that wider history. But either way, the nightmare is here, and like liberals seem completely useless. And I think it's a big moment. We're in a transitional moment for sure. I hope the left starts fighting.
Right, we are at the I think we're at the trembling extreme dialectical edge here, and just like during the run up to the election, people keep looking off stage as if like some kind of arbiter of etiquette or normalcy, quote unquote, is going to come and steer things back to places that we're comfortable with.
They want Oprah. They want Oprah. And because Oprah produces the feeling that they had when Obama was in there, and it's like we got to move beyond that, man. I think we need to have figures. We need to have charismatic figures on our team for sure. But this idea that some figure waiting off stage is going to come make everything good again and say the right words is just it's silly, and it's bad politics, and it's not anywhere near the force we need to confront what's happening.
I think that's absolutely right. And I know we're probably reaching our time, but it does kind of, I think, put a fine point, if I can talk about this for a sec.
Sure, go ahead.
I think it puts a fine point on, just to kind of bring this back to the point of the episode, I think, is to try to explain, what drew me to history.
Sure.
And why I think, like history, what value it has in understanding the present, and also what value the present has for how we understand history, right? I was listening to the interview that you did with Bruce Schulman, which I thought was great, and something he said really caught my attention. He said something to the effect of like every work of history is somewhat autobiographical.
Yeah, totally.
And that really resonated, because I think more than anything, my own work is autobiographical in the sense that I am trying to understand the radical changes that have happened to me and to us as Web 2.0 and the kind of broader technological environment of which it is a part has become a taken for granted fixture of daily life over like the past 10 years.
Yep. Yeah.
And I mean, I think the axiom that historians should avoid trying to explain the present is there for good reason. Because we're so caught up in the meat grinder that it's hard to know how things are going to look, in years' time. I mean, what shapes, things are going to take. But still, I think that there is a significant gift, if I can call it that, that has been given to us in this kind of mediated atmosphere over the past 10 years. A sort of upending of ways of life that we had been used to, and a sort of reformulation of the connections that we make, the ways that we communicate, and the ways that we engage in politics.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the Trump era has put those things into very stark relief.
Yeah.
Right. We are seeing and experiencing firsthand how the changing media environment in the 21st century shapes politics.
Yeah, yeah.
Because when we're writing the history of the beginning of the Trump era, we're going to have plenty of work to do, you know, and you and many of the people that you've interviewed are doing this to try to figure out how his brand of, you know, populist ethnonationalism came to resonate with people, how the backlash to Obama materialized and the shifts on the right and blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
But we're also going to have to ask, I think, other questions that are incredibly difficult to place in the making of history if we're using many conventional tools for explaining and telling history. So like, and what, for instance, are the political ramifications of a country's increasingly pervasive loss of long-term memory?
Yeah. Yeah, right.
And
so
you know,
good.
Right. I mean, like it's a really hard thing to kind of place, but it's one of the things that I think, again, in the autobiographical sense, I've noticed about myself over the past 5, 6, 7 years is that my memory is not as good as it used to be. I've become plugged in my long-term memory. That is, I've been plugged into this kind of hyper speed of the immediate that, you know, social media and the digital news flow, you know, like attunes me to. And I, as have others, and I think that this is having a very significant impact, not only on what we were talking about at the very beginning, right, which is like the politics of resentment has found a place to flourish, in a social media economy where the dopamine hits come from like the responses of other people that you get to see from your phone or your computer.
Yeah, it's like the history and politics become visceral. They become part of your like personal life, and they're in your pocket. You know, like you pull out your little device and you engage in that kind of historical political reality, however distorted it might be. But it's as filtered through like your friends and family members fighting with you about it. And yeah, you know, you're right. And I think, you know, all of that is stuff that as a historian, I'm like, I don't know what it means. You know, we're in it right now. Like we don't. Yeah. I think that no matter what. You're absolutely right. When historians of the future are unpacking the Trump phenomenon and you know the reaction to Obama, etc., the internet is going to be a huge part of it, and we don't really know what direction things are going. And I mean, I think they're kind of going in a multiplicity of directions. But either way, you know, there's that dialectic, there's that paradox, you know, happening, you know, as we speak. I mean, the social media is just lighting up with whatever we're talking about today, and it's like a form of directed attention that's so new that I think we're going to be figuring it out for a long time.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, like, you know, just I think, I don't know if I even like really mentioned it, but yeah, like my historical work, because I started my PhD in comp lit and then 2 years in decided one wasn't enough. So I applied for a PhD in history here. So now I'm doing like a dual thing. And it was when I realized through the help of my advisors that like there was room for this kind of thing that I wanted to, and you asked earlier about the thing about the literature of politics, right? It's because, you know, I as a lover and reader of literature, right? I was always fascinated in the ways that literature, that kind of open space, the kind of synapse between me and literature that affected, you know, the ways that I thought, that affected the ways that I interacted with people. It was actually through literature and through the painstaking attention to the inner psychology of different people that like Dostoevsky and Gogol and all these other Russian writers who were kind of my gateway drug helped me see that actually started to crack the conceptions, the preconceived notions of the world that I had, having grown up with a conservative worldview.
Yeah.
And
I love that.
And I guess my transition to history as a Mexicanist and studying, you know, the U.S., Mexico in the 20th century, was to think not only about how the symbology of, you know, literature affects people and you know, shapes the ways that they think and act, but how the media itself, right, like is part of that kind of constant dialectical back and forth between, you know, subjects who are still in the process of becoming and the material worlds in which they are embedded, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And so I think whether it's, you know, the university as a kind of material political institution, whether it's, you know, the Mexican radicals in the Communist Party in the 1920s, who I look at, you know, who are building their newspaper, and trying to find ways to disseminate it and use it as an organ for effectuating political change, right? All these kinds of disparate topics, I think, coalesce around what is for me a fundamental curiosity about the flux of subject formation and of politics, and I think that the present, as we're pretty fucking fluxed right now.
Yeah,
and I think that
feel the
puts
flux.
a fine point on it.
Yeah,
feel
totally.
the flux, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that just really puts a fine point, I think,
Totally.
for me on how the concepts that we have about politics and subjectivity and personhood and community are in kind of constant conversation with the material world, and depend on the robustness or changeability of those kinds of materials, practices, and so on and so forth.
Well, thanks for sharing all that, and thanks for sharing your story. I think that we have so much more to talk about, you and I hope you can come back for an AM/FM. We can talk about some of the weirder points of where we're at politically, now that we've gotten your personal story out of the way.
Yeah, man, I can't wait.
All right, I want to thank my guest, Maximillian Alvarez. I had a great time talking with him. Max is a really important voice. I think that, one of the things that he does well is kind of articulate what the value of higher education, the value of people getting PhDs in Russian literature and the humanities, because that is being shat upon. That is being shat upon not only by, the right wing, who have been trying to dismantle education in this country for decades, but it's being destroyed and attacked by neoliberals. I think that it was Obama who said something like, we don't need people getting philosophy degrees. So that's an outrageous position. And the idea that we're all going to just sit here while the entire culture moves away from the ideas that are coming out of the academy, I think is something that we need to intervene upon. And we need to have people like Max and others who are out there kind of speaking to the value of this stuff and bringing their ideas to the public, because we've got to change the direction of things, and that's one of the places that I think that we need to be focusing our energies upon. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. That was Max Alvarez. Check out all his stuff. You can go to thebaffler.com and you can find Nostalgia Trap there, but you can also find Max's columns and a whole bunch of other stuff. So check that out. And thanks so much for all the people that are supporting the show. Again, you can do that and subscribe at patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. Thanks so much. We will talk to you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.